Section 17 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 17. July 1769. Part 2. 1769 July 13. Depart o Tahiti. About 10 this morn sailed from o Tahiti, leaving our friends, some of them at least, I really believe, personally sorry for our departure, notwithstanding the confinement of the day before yesterday had frightened and affronted them as much as possible. Yet our nearest friends came on board at this critical time, except only Tuburai and Tamio. We had Oberea, Otheothea, Taioa, Nuna, Tuanamate, Potatu, Polothera, etc. on board, when the anchor was weighed. They took their leaves tenderly enough, not without plenty of tears, though entirely without the clamorous weeping made use of by the other Indians, several boats of whom were about the ship, shouting out their lamentations, as vying with each other, not who should cry most, but who should cry loudest, a custom we had often condemned in conversation with our particular friends, as savouring more of affected than real grief. Tupaia, who after all his struggles stood firm at the last in his resolution of accompanying us, parted with a few heartfelt tears. So I judged them to have been, by the efforts I saw him make to hide them. He sent by Otheothea his last present, a shirt to Potamai, Dutaha's favourite mistress. He and I went then to the topmast head, where we stood a long time, waving to the canoes as they went off, after which he came down and showed no further signs of seriousness or concern. In the evening Tethuroa in sight. Before night it appears clearly to be a very low island, and but small, which, with Tupaia's declaring that there were no fixed inhabitants upon it, only the people of o Tahiti, who went there for a few days to fish, determined us to content ourselves with what we had seen, and stand on in search of Urietia, which he described to be a well-peopled island, as large as o Tahiti. 1769 July 14. Before noon today 2 islands are in sight, which Tupaia calls Huahine and Ulhiatia. Both of them make high and large. 1769 July 15. Calm all last night. This morn hazy, so that no land is seen. Light breezes and calms succeed each other all morn. Our Indian often prayed to Tane for a wind, and has often boasted to me of the success of his prayers, which I plainly saw he never began till he saw a breeze so near the ship that it generally reached her before his prayer was finished. At sunset, a pleasant breeze. Owahine and Ulhiatia very plainly seen. 1769 July 16. This morn we were very near the island. Some canoes very soon came off, but appeared very much frightened. One, however, came to us, bringing a chief and his wife, who on Tupaia's assurances of friendship from us came on board. They were like the o Tahiti people in language, dress, tattoo, in short, in everything. Tupaia has always said that the people of this island and Urietia will not steal, in which they indeed differ much from our late friends, if they only keep to their character. Soon after dinner we came to an anchor in a very fine bay called by the natives Owala, and immediately went ashore. As soon as we landed, Tupaia squatted down on the ground, and ranging us on one side and the Indians on the other, began to pray. Our chief, who stood opposite to him, answering him in kind responses. This lasted about a quarter of an hour, in which time he sent at different intervals 2 handkerchiefs and some beads he had prepared for the purpose as presents to Iatua. These were sent among many messages, which passed backwards and forwards with plantains, malapoides, etc. In return for this present to the gods, which it seems was very acceptable, we had a hog given for our Iatua, which in this case will certainly be our bellies. 1769 July 17. Went ashore this morn and walked up the hills. Found the productions here almost exactly similar to those of o Tahiti. Upon the hills the rocks and clay were burnt, if anything more than they were in that island. The people were also almost exactly like our late friends, but rather more stupid and lazy, in proof of which I need only say that we should have gone much higher up the hills than we did if we could have persuaded them to accompany us, whose only excuse was the fear of being killed by the fatigue. Their houses are very neat, and their boat-houses particularly large. One of those I measured 50 long paces in length, 10 broad, and 24 feet high. The Gothic arch of which it consisted was supported on one side by 26, on the other by 30, pillars, or rather clumsy thick posts, of about 2 feet high and 1 thick. Most of these were carved with heads of men, boys, or other devices, as the rough fancy and more rough workmanship of these stone hatchet-furnished gentry suggested and executed. The flats were filled with very fine breadfruit trees and an infinite number of coconuts, upon which latter the inhabitants seemed to depend much more than those of Tahiti. We saw, however, large spaces occupied by lagoons and salt swamps, upon which neither breadfruit nor coconuts would thrive. 1769, July 18. This morning went to take a further view of a building which we had seen yesterday and admired a good deal, taking with us Tupaya's boy Taieto, for himself was too much engaged with his friends to have time to accompany us. The boy told us that it was called Ehware no Iatua, or the house of the god, but could not explain at all the use of it. It consisted of a chest whose lid was nicely sewed on and thatched over very neatly with palm nut leaves. The whole was fixed upon 2 poles, by little arches of carved wood very neat. These poles seemed to be used in carrying it from place to place, though when we saw it, it was supported upon 2 posts. One end of the chest was open, with a round hole within a square one. This was yesterday stopped up with a piece of cloth, which, lest I should offend the people, I left untouched. But today the cloth, and probably the contents of the chest, were removed, as there was nothing at all in it. Trade today does not go on with any spirit. The people, when anything is offered, will not take it on their own judgment, but take the opinion of 20 or 30 people about them, which takes up much time. We, however, got 11 pigs. 1769, July 19. This morn trade rather better. Got 3 very large hogs and some pigs by producing hatchets, which had not been before given, and we hoped to have had no occasion for, in an island which had not before been seen by Europeans. In the afternoon go to sea. The island of Huahine differs scarce at all from that of Tahiti, either in its productions or in the customs of the people. In all our searches here, we have not found above 10 or 12 new plants, a few insects indeed, and a species of scorpions which we did not see at Tahiti. This island seems, however, this year at least to be a month forwarder than the other, as the ripeness of the coconuts, now full of kernel, and the new breadfruit, some of which is fit to eat, fully evinces. Of the coconut kernels they make a food which they call poi, by scraping them fine and mixing them with yams also scraped. These are put into a wooden trough and hot stones laid upon them, by which means a kind of oily hasty pudding is made, which our people relished very well, especially fried. The men here are large made and stout. One we measured was 6'3" high, and well made. The women very fair, more so than at Tahiti, though we saw none so handsome. Both sexes seemed to be less timid as well as less curious. The firing of a gun frightened them, but they did not fall down, as our Tahiti friends at first generally did. On one of their people being taken in the fact of stealing, and seized upon by the hair, they did not run away, but coming round inquired into the cause, and seemingly, at least, approving of the justice recommended, a beating for the offender, which was immediately put in practice. When they first came on board the ship, they seemed struck with a sight so new, and wondered at everything that was shown to them, but did not seem to search and inquire for matters of curiosity, even so much as the Tahiti people did, though they had before seen almost everything we had to show them. 1769, July 20. At noon today come to an anchor at Ulhiatia, in a bay called by the natives Oapoa, the entrance of which is very near a small islet called Ohuatera. Some Indians soon came on board, expressing signs of fear. They were 2 canoes, each of which brought a woman, I suppose as a mark of confidence, and a pig as a present. To each of these ladies was given a spike nail and some beads, with which they seemed much pleased. Tupaya, who has always expressed much fear of the men of Bolabola, says that they have conquered this island, and will tomorrow come down and fight with us. We therefore lose no time in going ashore, as we are to have today to ourselves. On landing, Tupaya repeated the ceremony of praying, as at Huahine, after which an English jack was set up on shore, and Captain Cook took possession of this and the other 3 islands in sight, viz. Huahine, Otaha, and Bolabola, for the use of His Britannic Majesty. After this we walked together to a great marae, called Tapo de Boatia, whatever that may signify. It is different from those of Tahiti, being no more than walls about 8 feet high of coral stones, some of an immense size, filled up with smaller ones, the whole ornamented with many planks, set upon their ends and carved their whole length. In the neighborhood of this we found the altar, or ihuata, upon which lay the last sacrifice, a hog of about 80 pounds weight, which had been put up there whole, and very nicely roasted. Here were also 4 or 5 ehuare no iatua, or god houses, which were made to be carried on poles. One of these I examined by putting my hand into it. Within was a parcel, about 5 feet long and 1 thick, wrapped up in mats. These I tore with my fingers, till I came to a covering of mat made of plaited coconut fibres, which it was impossible to get through, so I was obliged to desist, especially as what I had already done gave much offence to our new friends. From hence we went to an adjoining longhouse, where among several things, such as rolls of cloth, etc., was standing a model of a canoe, about 3 feet long, upon which were tied 8 under jawbones of men. Tupaya told us that it was the custom of these islanders to cut off the jawbones of those who they had killed in war. These were, he said, the jawbones of Ulhiatia people, but how they came here, or why tied thus to a canoe, we could not understand. We were therefore contented to conjecture that they were placed there as a trophy won back from the men of Bolabola, their mortal enemies. Night now came on apace, but Dr. Solander and myself walked along the shore a little way, and saw an ehuare no iatua, the under part of which was lined with a row of jawbones, which we were also told were those of Ulhiatua men. We saw also coconut trees, the stems of which were hung round with nuts, so that no part of them could be seen. These, we were told, were put there that they might dry a little, and be prepared for making poi. We saw also a tree of Ficus prolixa in great perfection, the trunk, or rather congeries, of roots, of which was 42 paces in circumference. 1769, July 21. Dr. Solander and myself walked out this morn, and saw many large boathouses, like that described at Huahine, page 303 and 401. On these the inhabitants were at work making and repairing the large canoes called by them pahi, at which business they worked with incredible cleverness, though their tools certainly were as bad as possible. I will first give the dimensions and description of one of their boats, and then their method of building. Its extreme length from stem to stern, not reckoning the bending up of both those parts, 51 feet. Breadth in the clear at the top forward, 14 inches. Midships 18, aft 15. In the bilge forward 32 inches, midships 35, aft 33. Depth midships 3 feet 4. Height from the ground she stood on 3 foot 6. Her head raised, without the figure, 4 foot 4 from the ground. The figure 11 inches. Her stern 8 feet 9, the figure 2 feet. Alongside of her was lashed another like her in all parts, but less in proportion, being only 33 feet in her extreme length. The form of these canoes is better to be expressed by a drawing than by any description. This annexed may serve to give some idea of a section. AA is the first seam, BB the second, CC the third. The first stage or keel under AA is made of trees hollowed out like a trough, for which purpose they choose the longest trees they can get, so that 2 or 3 make the bottom of their largest boats, some of which are much larger than that described here, as I make a rule to describe everything of this kind from the common size. The next stage under BB is formed of straight plank, about 4 feet long and 15 inches broad, and 2 inches thick. The next stage under CC is made like the bottom of trunks of trees hollowed into its bilging form. The last, or that above CC, is formed also out of trunks of trees, so that the moulding is of one piece with the plank. This work, difficult as it would be to an European, with his iron tools, they perform, without iron, and with amazing dexterity. They hollow with their stone axes at least as fast as our carpenters could do, and dub those slowly with prodigious nicety. I have seen them take off the skin of an angular plank without missing a stroke, the skin itself scarce 1/16 part of an inch in thickness. Boring the holes through which their sewing is to pass seems to be their greatest difficulty. Their tools are made of bones of men, generally the thin bone of the upper arm. These they grind very sharp and fix to a handle of wood, making the instrument serve the purpose of a gouge by striking it with a mallet, made of a hard black wood, and with them would do as much work as with iron tools, was it not that the brittle edge of the tool is very liable to be broke. When they have prepared their planks, etc., the keel is laid on blocks, and the whole canoe put together much in the same manner as we do a ship, the sides being supported by stanchions, and all the seams wedged together before the last sewing is put on, so that they become tolerably tight, considering that they are without caulking. With these boats they venture themselves out of sight of land. We saw several of them at Tahiti, which had come from Ulhiatia, and Tupaia has told us that they go voyages of 20 days. Whether true or false, I do not affirm. They keep them very carefully under such boathouses as are described, one of which we measured today 60 yards by 11. 1769, July 22. Weather worse than yesterday. In the course of last night it blew very fresh, this morn rainy. Walk out, but meet little worth observation. Saw a double pahi, such as that described yesterday, but much larger. She had upon her an awning supported by pillars which held the floor of it, 4 feet at least above the deck, or upper surface of the boat. Also a trough for making poi, or sour paste, carved out of a hard black stone, such as their hatchets are made of. It was 2 feet 7 long and 1 foot 4 broad, very thick and substantial, and supported by 4 short feet, the whole neatly furnished and perfectly polished, though quite without ornaments. Today, as well as yesterday, every one of us who walked out saw many jawbones, fixed up in houses, as well as out of doors, a confirmation of their taking them instead of scalps. 1769, July 23. Weather mended a little. Dr. Solander and myself go upon the hills in hopes of finding new plants, but ill rewarded. Return home at night, having seen nothing worth mentioning. 1769, July 24. Foul wind. The captain attempts to go out of the reef at another passage, situate between the 2 islets of Oporuru and Tamo, the ship turning to the windward within the reef, in doing which she narrowly escapes going ashore. The quartermaster in the cabins called out 2 fathom. The ship drawing at least 14 feet made it impossible that such a shoal should be under her keel, so either the man was mistaken or she went along the edge of a coral rock, many of which were here as steep as a wall. Soon after this he came to an anchor, and I went ashore, but saw nothing but a small marae ornamented with 2 sticks, about 5 feet long, each hung with jawbones as thick as possible, and one having a skull stuck on its top. 1769, July 25. This morn get to sea and turn to windward all day. Find that the 2 islands, Ulhiatia and Otaha, are enclosed by 1 reef. Tupaia says that there is a large passage through it, between them, and a harbour within it. Also another fronting a large bay on the easternmost end of Otaha. 1769, July 26. Foul wind continues last night. The ship has fallen much to leeward. Before night, however, we have gained our loss and something more, as we discover a low island ahead, which Tupaia tells us is called by the natives Tupi. He says that it is low without a harbour and yields nothing but coconuts and fish. 1769, July 27. Turn to leeward all night and all day again, so much that at night Tupi is not in sight. 1769, July 28. Wind still baffles us as much as ever. This morn hoisted out a boat and sent ashore on the island of Otaha, in which Dr. Solander and myself took a passage. We went through a large breach in the reef situate between 2 islands called Tohatu and Wenuaya, within which we found very spacious harbours, particularly in one bay, which was at least 3 miles deep. The inhabitants as usual, so that long before night we had purchased 3 hogs, 21 fowls, and as many yams and plantains as the boat could hold. Indeed, of these last, we might have had any quantity, a more useful refreshment they are to us, in my opinion, even than the pork. They have been for this week past boiled and served instead of bread. Every man in the ship is fond of them, and with us in the cabin they agree much better than the breadfruit did, which sometimes griped us. But what makes any refreshments of this kind the more acceptable is that our bread is at present so full of vermin that, notwithstanding all possible care, I have sometimes had 20 at a time in my mouth, every one of which tasted as hot as mustard. The island itself seemed more barren than Ulhiatia, though much like it in produce, breadfruit being less plentiful than plantains and coconuts. The people perfectly the same, so much so that I did not observe one new custom or anything else among them worth mention. They were not very numerous, but flocked from all quarters to the boat, wherever she went, bringing with them whatever they had to sell. Here, as well as in the rest of the islands, they paid us the same compliment they are used to pay to their own kings, uncovering their shoulders and lapping their garments round their breasts. Here particularly, they were so scrupulously observant of it that a man was sent with us who called out to everyone he met, telling him what we were and what he was to do. 1769, July 29. The wind last night has favoured us a little, so that we were this morn close to the island of Bolabola, whose high craggy peak seems, on this side at least, totally inaccessible to men. Round it is a large quantity of low land, which seems very barren. Tupaia tells us that between the shore and the mountain is a large salt lagoon, a certain sign of barrenness in this climate. He, however, tells us that there are upon the island plenty of hogs and fowls, as well as the vegetables we have generally met with. We see but few people on the shore. Tupaia tells us that they are gone to Ulhiatia, where we shall find them. He says also that there is no breach in the reef on this side of the island, but on the other there is one large enough for a ship to go in, and a good harbour within it. 1769, July 30. This morn, wind right on end. See a new island called by Tupaia, Mourua. He says it is fertile and yields plentifully all kinds of provision, but that there is no breach in the reef large enough for the ship to go into. 1769, July 31. Still turning to windward, with the wind right in our teeth. Towards evening, however, it mends, and gives us hopes that we may tomorrow morn come to anchor in Ulhiatia. Tupaia today shows us a large breach in the reef of Otaha, through which the ship might conveniently pass into a large bay, where he says there is good anchorage. We have now a very good opinion of Tupaia's pilotage, especially since we observed him at Huahine send a man to dive down to the heel of the ship's rudder. This the man did several times and reported to him the depth of the water the ship drew, after which he has never suffered her to go in less than 5 fathom water, without being much alarmed. End of section 17, part 2 of July, 1769.